Wait, did I hit record? Once upon a time, in a land far away, a duchess much beloved had this one thing to say. I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this. And so she beamed as she schemed to gain more money and clout, to marry two worlds, to live half in and half out. But did she succeed? After pointlessly prancing around Jordan and taking part in their favorite hobby of exploiting sick and injured children in hospitals earlier this year, like a shark who gets a whiff or a taste of blood, they just couldn't wait to do it again. Going as far as Australia to scratch that indefatigable itch under the guise of yet another royal tour that, let's face it, nobody wanted or asked for, other than, of course, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry themselves. Least of all, the Australians who had to foot their security bill. Now, the official story is that this is a privately funded tour and that it isn't yet another poor attempt at royal cosplay, but rather it was another attempt at humanitarian cosplay instead. Get your cosplay categories right, people. However, one look at their itinerary reveals that this trip has all the classic hallmarks of a royal tour. Their first stop was at the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne, a children's hospital which was previously visited by Charles and Diana in 1985. Meghan then visited a women's shelter, likely feeling nostalgic and therefore wanting to recreate a 2023 incident when she was criticized heavily for wearing her usual multi-$1,000 jewelry set as she worked alongside homeless women. There were meetings with veteran families at the Australian National Veterans Art Museum. There was a decidedly royal stopover at the Australian War Memorial, meeting with the Bondi shooting survivors from late last year. And in case you were still doubting that this was clearly a royal cosplay tour in all but name, they even recreated a moment from their 2018 royal tour when they sailed around Sydney Harbour as part of the 2018 Invictus Games. Even their now defunct Instagram account, Sussex Royal, was being tagged by several of the organizers who stooped low enough to invite them. Seriously, I don't understand what's going on in Australia, but not my problem anymore. And as if that wasn't enough, even the Getty Images official description literally uses the term royal trip. So that's the half-in component of the equation. The half-out component deserves its own chapter, which we will be getting to later on in this video. When it comes to costs that are associated with royal tours, the home government of the relevant royals, being the UK in this instance, normally covers the costs of the flights, with the host country covering everything else, including security. As I'd mentioned earlier, security was provided for Meghan and Harry by both the New South Wales and Victoria Police, meaning that the security was taxpayer funded. But then what of it? Many Sussex supporters or even neutral people might argue. They are, after all, still royalty, whether we like it or not. And so, organized by the government or not, official or not, this tour is royal whether we like it or not. But to that, I would say, aside from the fact that royalty isn't just this label that is slapped onto someone, thereby entitling them to all the riches and taxpayer-funded privileges a person could ask for, but rather, it's a job. As we've seen with other royals such as Eugenie and Beatrice, and now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, being born into it or marrying into it simply doesn't cut it. You have to be actively working in order to have access to certain perks. Meghan and Harry notoriously quit back in January of 2020. Moreover, this trip was not organized by the British government. And so while this may look like a royal tour with all the trimmings, beneath the glossy veneer, it most certainly is not. Royal tours have been orchestrated for centuries, and while the purpose of these tours has always changed according to the political climate at the time, there was, for the most part, one thing that all these tours had in common. They were never about the individual royals on tour, And they were most certainly not about merching. In ancient and medieval times, when a monarch's dominion over their land and people was tightly tied to religion and was rarely questioned or challenged, at least not openly, royal tours served as proof that the monarch was still alive, to visit battlefields abroad, keeping the masses in check and displaying their power and magnificence. Even much later, in the reign of the late Queen Elizabeth II, she would famously say, "We have to be seen to be believed." An echo of Lord Salisbury's words to Queen Victoria before her, when, after secluding herself to mourn her husband's death, Lord Salisbury wrote, "Seclusion is one of the few luxuries in which royal personages may not indulge. Loyalty needs a life of almost unintermitted publicity to sustain it." But underscoring this display of imperial majesty and reverence was also a goal that is largely the driving force of royal tours today: to develop a personal relationship between the sovereign and their colonial subjects by appearing in the flesh, as a means of claiming their allegiance and countering any moves towards independence. And when it comes to modern day tours, the tours that we see going on today, they are largely conducted with the same soft diplomacy goals. This extends to the fashion choices of royals as well, who are known to incorporate elements from the nation which they are visiting or hosting into their outfits as a tangible visual representation of this soft diplomacy. One thing they most certainly don't do, and have likely never done in the history of royal tours ever, is then go on to post details of every single item worn on their trip and earn a commission on them like a common influencer. Which brings us to back to the quote that I opened this video with. "I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this." For anyone who's claiming this is a rumor, by the way, Meghan has, I believe, never openly refuted ever saying this, and she has most definitely never sued. And we know how much these people love suing. But how fitting is it for Meghan to have uttered these words during her 2018 tour of Australia, back when she was actually a working senior royal? Because here she is in Australia 8 years later, getting paid to talk about herself, pose for pictures, and shake hands with lowly commoners whom she didn't even deem were worth more than 2 hours of her precious time. And in a nod to her former life before meeting Harry, way back in 2015, 2016, when she attempted to be taken seriously as a food critic.
Unfortunately, the yogurt sauce didn't really fit with everything else that we had going on the plate.
She made a surprise appearance on MasterChef Australia, for which she also got paid very handsomely. The exact figure hasn't been disclosed, but the most comparable data point available is Katy Perry's reported $100,000 fee for her season 12 guest spot back in 2020. I'd also already briefly mentioned Meghan's shameless foray into merching her clothing online on a platform called One Off. And she did not discriminate. Whether it was the outfit she wore to talk to the survivors of the Bondi shootings late last year, or when she went to sick children and used them as props, it didn't matter. If she wore it, it appeared on the website. So did she finally succeed in attaining the very thing that the Queen forbade them from doing back when she was alive, which is having their royal cake and selling it too? Purely based on the optics of this tour, the answer appears to be yes. Victoria Ward of The Telegraph wrote that the Duke and Duchess have succeeded in self-promotion, a full royal tour, an attempt to monetize their titles, and a chance to highlight their charitable causes. Pray tell me what these are. I have no idea. Because like I said, once you start merching the outfit you wore, the cause is no longer charitable. She writes that the whirlwind tour that took in Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney was considered something of a test, a chance to see whether this version of royal life, the brand Sussex version, was sustainable. The visit was considered a huge success and will now form a blueprint for future tours, including potentially those to the UK, if they can get the security that they want. "We've tested the playbook. It worked," a source close to the Sussexes told The Telegraph. The palace, on the other hand, while reportedly irritated, apparently doesn't plan to do anything about it. According to the Daily Mail, there have been no renewed conversations about the king stripping them of their titles and Harry's place in the order of succession. The palace fears any suggestion of defenestration would only add to the Sussexes' sense of injustice. It's clearly irritating, but the feeling is that the institution just needs to roll with the punches in order to keep moving forwards. I don't know, you tell me, do you agree? I find this reporting to be quite reliable because it echoes what Tom Bauer wrote in his latest book, Betrayal. If you haven't watched my review of the book, it will be linked in the description box. I mean, no, probably not. I'm going to forget. But it's a recent video on the channel. You can just find it. But I digress. He wrote that Meghan and Harry were being monstrous, Meghan in particular, while they were still within the royal fold, what with the way they were bullying the staff. But the palace went, you know what? We don't want to piss them off any further. We just want to keep the peace, which is effectively what is being reported now. If this tour has proven anything, it's that Meghan and Harry lied back when they claimed that they didn't want the job, they didn't want this life, and they didn't want the attention. Harry even stated during his speech at the InterEdge Summit in Melbourne Park that he didn't want to carry on with this job, particularly after his mother's death. But then he'd realized, well, hang on, I could use this royal platform for good to help other people who might be in a similar position. He also asked, what would my mum want me to do? And that really changed his perspective, which begs the question, why did you quit? Why all that drama? Why all that animosity? Why all that lobbing of grenades at your family if this is what you wanted to do anyway? The answer is simple and hasn't changed since 2019. Meghan and Harry, Meghan in particular, wanted to do royalty her way, meaning she wanted to commercialize it. It was never about service, at least not for her. Otherwise, why would she have complained about doing what she's doing right now, 8 years later, with the only difference being she's getting paid? In terms of conversations not being renewed about the removal of titles, perhaps that's not necessarily complacency on the king's part, but rather inactivity due to the fact that moves have already been made towards that goal of eventually perhaps stripping Meghan and Harry of their titles, just as the king did with his own brother. On the official UK Parliament website, the removal of titles bill has been listed for a second reading on the 24th of April 2026, so in less than a week's time. It would give the monarch powers to remove titles, to provide that such removals can be done by the monarch on their own initiative, following a recommendation of a joint committee of parliament, or at the request of the person who holds the title, and for connected purposes. Now, of course, Harry and Meghan are never going to request this, but all this to say, perhaps steps have already been taken, and the king simply doesn't have to do anything at this point. And hey, even if nothing is done about this during King Charles's reign, while I do hope that he still has many years ahead of him, William is going to ascend the throne one day or another. And I think we all know that it's going to be a very different story once that happens. What do you think? Have Meghan and Harry successfully managed to orchestrate their dream of living as half-in, half-out royals? Was the Australian tour actually as successful as they wanted to appear to be? Or was it purely good angles, camera angles, making sure it looks like they're surrounded by people? We know from Tom Bauer's Betrayal that that's exactly what they were doing during the last few Invictus games. The halls were empty, but people were still herded around Meghan and Harry to make it look like they were being overwhelmed by the amount of people who simply couldn't get enough of them. Oh, and if you want to help me get paid for all the hard work that I do to keep this channel running, then do consider visiting the link to Patreon in the description box. Otherwise, I'll continue seeing you here on YouTube. No hard feelings. You. See you next time. Bye-bye. Can't believe I'm not getting paid for this. Ugh.